So here's another story, another origin story, where when you start to retell the story, it changes how things happen, how people understand things. And this is actually the story that for me kind of got me started in working with origin stories. So I had been working in climate change for pretty much my entire adult life, believing it was one of the most important issues of our times. And I had studied with many different people in many different parts of the world, and the overwhelming origin story narrative that I heard about climate change was that climate change originates in the Industrial Revolution. Climate change comes from carbon, too much carbon in the atmosphere. It happens in the Industrial Revolution. If you look at the graphs, it goes whoosh like that. Very clear to see. You are probably familiar with those kinds of graphs. And then when I wanted to work with the spiritual, cultural dimensions of climate change, and so I had gone to Union Theological Seminary in the city of New York, where I was pursuing my MDiv and pursuing my call to ministry. And I went to a climate justice gathering. And this was very much like a lot of other climate justice gatherings that I had been to. It was led, in this case, had a very strong Indigenous and BIPOC leadership. And I was having a very casual conversation by the water cooler with a young man. I asked him, what do you want? What is your community? What do you guys want support on? And he had been working with members of the Onondaga Nation. And he said something that clearly he had said many times before, just like I had asked my question many times before. And he said, oh, well, we want help rescinding the doctrine of discovery. And I said, but to myself, I said, what does the doctrine of discovery have to do with climate justice and climate change? I.e., the reason why we are at this conference. Had he said that exact same story to me, or exact same thing in Indigenous rights gathering, I don't know how much I would have really picked it up. But because he said this to me in the context of a climate justice gathering, and because I had worked with many different Indigenous peoples around the world, I knew that when someone who is really deeply impacted by an issue tells you something about that issue, they should probably be listened to, and they probably know what they're talking about. And it was up to me to do some research, and so I did. And very quickly, very, very, very quickly, I saw ways in which, certainly in terms of consciousness and mind shifts, but also economically and in some ways geographically, I could see how colonization, which we can trace to the doctrine of discovery as an origin point, not the only origin point, but an origin point, could absolutely be seen as one of the origins of, the doctrine of discovery could be seen as one of the origins of climate change. Now, why does that matter? That matters because in the classic story of climate change coming from industrialization, then the solution, you're going to create your solution based on the source of the problem. If you source the problem in industrialization, your solutions are going to be primarily technical, industrial, and policy oriented, scientific and policy orientation. And that is what most of our solutions around climate change have been about. If you re-originate climate change into colonization, then suddenly you have to deal with underlying patterns of extraction. And you have to deal with the systems, economic systems, and the consciousness that leads consistently, place after place, to different types and forms of extraction. You are forced to put together race and racism and ecological destruction. You can't separate them. Once you start originating to colonization, you're forced to deal with the domination code. And so it completely shifts all the solutions that people propose for climate change. And it does a lot of other things too, and I have a whole remembering course and we talk about that. We get into a lot of this substance in a lot more detail. But the narrative origin story shifts policies, it shifts funding streams, it shifts relationship building, it shifts where do you put your energy and when and how and with whom. All that changes when you change how you're originating the story.